Well, good morning, all. We're here together with our expert consulting amigos, Ed Lasik and John Mills. And we're going to talk today about a little bit of a new subject, but it still has to do with the overall marketing planning concept. And then we'll have a little discussion right after that. So let's go to the screen here and we'll get started. Well, this is strange. I changed my screen and my share button is there it is. It came up.
Well, actually, this is one of the issues with creative technology. We've lost control of our own devices because
Mm,
we've signed off on not owning the app, and therefore everybody has the opportunity to upgrade. It's ultimately a good thing, but we are finding a lot more people who all of a sudden the layout changes, the buttons change, and what you're used to has changed. And there needs to be, I think there's got to be a middle ground here.
yeah, I think they're doing. I believe Microsoft is starting to fade because that's what they're trying to do. I refuse to upgrade. I still am working on Windows 10 because I don't want to do any of their cloud stuff because I think their cloud stuff stinks. And companies have had our companies have had nothing but trouble with it and the teams and all the rest, and it's just not there. So I think there is something to all of that. So, okay, let's see now by the numbers. This is I call this by the numbers because the the most frequent comments that I ever got from an article that I wrote was called Marketing by the Numbers. And basically it was, stop doing the creative stuff and think about how you're going to calculate your responsiveness and your effectiveness in terms of your marketing numbers. And so kind of a throwback to that article, which I wrote some almost 30 years ago now. And a lot has changed, and I don't think I can write the same one today. And we're going to see some of those changes because we're going to take a look at marketing by the numbers, meaning the analysis. So let's kind of take a look at a little teeny bit of review. Uh, and that is, we're going to look at the marketing planning cycle again, just to kind of let you know where are. And this is by way of review. Where we started, if you recall, is at customers, and we went all the way around competition, companies, targeting, positioning, marketing, positioning, statements, etc. Then we got into the execution phase, and we talked about content, and we talked about media and communication. Now we're at measure or analyze, and I want to say right here that the very first part of analyzation or measurement is the feedback loop. Where do you get the data? Where does it come from? How do you gather it together? And I did a comprehensive piece with Microgiants on that. And rather than go through that, because it's exactly the same, go through that again, we will have down below in the notes, we'll have the link. And also at the end, we'll have a link so that you can go back and take a look at the feedback loop because the question will come up as we go through this. Well, where do you get the data? And you have to get the data from a series of feedback loops for marketing and as well as the analytics, which we all know is sort of built into some of the digital marketing. And so we'll touch that. So basically, that's kind of where we've been, and now we're going into the analyze, which will be probably a series of two or three or four because it's a really big subject. And it'd be very intense to try and cover it all at one time. So, question, what do we want to analyze? And of course, the answer is we want to analyze profitable, sustained, and new business. So, uh, then what do you mean by that? Well, it also is hitting the marketing campaign targets. So you've got two things that we're trying to measure. Are we creating revenue? Is that revenue profitable? And is it long-term sustainable? And number two, we started off with a campaign that would be to accomplish certain things. And it might just simply be we would like to increase our market share of this particular niche market that we're involved in. And that would be determined based on new business inside that particular market from maybe people have not been customers before, something like that. So then we would go through and we would try to determine number one, does it meet the first criteria, profitable business? And secondarily, did we actually accomplish what our marketing goals were? Why? Because we want to fix everything that didn't work. That's why we want to do that. And there's this constant battle of correcting things that didn't quite go right. Okay, but let's talk about profitable business right now. This is Ed's favorite topic. And profitable business is, and I looked this up, this is an AI's definition, and I agree completely with it. It is the relative measurement or efficiency of earnings. Now, when we get hung up about profit, and I've heard Ed speak on this topic on multiple occasions, and that is, you start up with your top line revenue, and then the question is, well, but did you make any money? And immediately, the business owner goes down to the very bottom line, and it's like, yeah, well, we made 5%. And then Ed will go, well, wait a minute. I mean, but do you know which products and which customers you made the money on? Blank look, staring in the headlights kind of thing, because the average small business just can't do that. They don't know that. In fact, most of them don't even understand the concepts of fixed and variable expenses. Now, we've done programs on that before, and I won't dwell on that too much here. But it has to be a constant issue because that's really where we find this out. So, number one, we're going to kind of get this out of the way, not because it's not significant, but because we've done it kind of before. But for some of you who haven't seen this before, the first place we go is the income statement, and we take a look at the revenue, and then you calculate your cost of goods. In other words, what did it cost you to provide the revenue, either in labor because you're providing services, or in actual material. If you're a manufacturer, you're buying supplies, you're buying raw products, you're manufacturing, you've got time there, you've got costs for machinery, et cetera. When the whole thing comes out done, ready to sell to the customer, what were all those costs? It does not include fixed expenses like rent, okay, and other things. So here's profit at the bottom, but we want to really focus on the margin as a percentage. It can vary by customer based on volume discounts or sales you have and more. And so, the issue here is your measurement is not just revenue. And your measurement is not bottom line profit. Your measurement is profitable sales. Any comments about that, Ed?
Well, you just did an outstanding job explaining it. That's
Okay.
very true.
Well,
It's based upon the
that's because I
operating
copied
profits.
you. I just copied you. That's all I did.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You did a good job. It's perfect.
So now let's kind of move on from there just a little bit, because when we take a look at this, we have to kind of think about a couple of different things. Um, and we want the additional margin as a percentage. That's why we're doing the marketing, is because we want to get more customers and we want to make money off of them. Now, it's important to know the percentage because, and we need that in a lot of different areas. The revenue category, for instance. So if you have a business where you've got a basic business I'll use an example of a former client where you rewind motors and then you also build controls for that. Those are two divisions and two totally different things, but they combine together to make one product. So then the question, but they're bought separately too. The question then is, well, okay, are you making money in your winding business, or are you making money in your controls business? Or, you want to know both of those. But then you want to know a little bit more too. You want to know how you're making money and from which customers you're making money. Got these a little bit out of order. But in addition, we want to know um, what kind of, in your inventory, what's the style, the size, and the color. Those are important issues. How are you going to rebuy? Now, this applies to your cost of goods sold, so this has a lot to do with that percentage margin. But you have to know what items are performing in order to be able to determine if you should go buy any more of them. Now, in the retail business, this is a harder problem, and it is the primary problem that retailers deal with, and that is markdowns. You bring it in, you mark it up 100 or 110%. But after selling for X number of weeks, or based on the turnover of that particular style, size, and color, or SKU as we call that, by a certain manufacturer, then you would put that on sale and try and get that out of there because you're not selling it fast enough to get rid of it by the end of the season. This stuff, we used to talk about fashion retail as being bananas. And that is, just imagine that say blouse or men's jacket or whatever it is. Just imagine that's a banana. Now, once it goes from green to yellow, you've got a very limited amount of time before you've got a bad banana with bruises all over it that nobody will buy. Well, just like in the store, if that banana begins to turn brown, the price goes down. And when it goes down to a certain point, nobody will buy it at all. And that's the issue. So turnover is a big issue. And from an accounting perspective, Ed would say, yes, you want to turn that merchandise as fast as possible because you've got money invested in it. But from this perspective, we're talking about you have to you have to have a positive margin on that merchandise, on that particular SKU, or you didn't make any money on that. And if you didn't hit that margin, you've got to calculate your markdowns in order to be able to get that out of the door. And there's a fairly complex analysis and sort of a little break-even point of view, a complex analysis of how much you should mark it down in terms of how fast the turnover should be. In the retail business, they call that gross margin return on investment. Okay, moving on. So another thing is vendor. You're buying certain items from a vendor to resell as to become part of your product. You need to know whether or not if their price goes up, potentially your price has to go up. If your price goes up, potentially your volume drops. A lot of talk about this in our supply chains right now because that really affects our manufacturing businesses as a whole. If we have prices going up, say because of transportation and oil, then you're going to have pressure on your own prices, and you have to make decisions about uh, inventory turnover in this particular case. And if certain vendors are not able, if you're not able to stay profitable on certain vendors, you're going to look for a new vendor. The producer, by that I'm talking about an internal producer. If you have contract people, for instance, who are doing a certain amount of labor for you, you need to know what that costs you and what your revenue is against that, and you end up with your margin there. And then, of course, we can't forget the salesperson. It's really important to know whether or not your salespeople are making you any money. Now, a lot of people use a sales commission model, and that sales commission model is great because it ensures that you can pay a certain amount of money to get a certain job done, and that works very nicely in order to control your expenses. But a lot of times there are things in there that you forget, like somebody doesn't hit their commission level and you have to pay salary. And so now they go from a variable expense to your revenue to a fixed expense because during that short period of time, you're paying them more than their commission was. So there are several of those things, and we won't get too far into that. And then, of course, you need to know whether or not you made money on your marketing campaign as a whole. Um, if you had a campaign, as I mentioned, to create new business in a particular niche, you want to know after you've gone through months, maybe even years, you want to know that overall you were making money on that campaign. Did the whole thing work? Did it not work? And if it didn't work so well, what was beyond that? Well, the specific ad or the event. You want to know what that is if you can. Um, obviously, you want to know if the ad worked. You want to know if the event worked. And then you want to know, well, that it was profitable business. So when you take a look at all of this stuff, I mean, it ends up being pretty crazy because you've got your digital ads, you've got Google, you've got Facebook, you might even have something on LinkedIn, you got that going on. You're doing some newspaper advertising, and you're doing a little bit of radio, a little bit of TV, and it's like, oh my God, what do I do? And this is kind of what happens is that people just freak out because how do they keep up with it all? Well, uh, fortunately, a big piece of this is going to be analysis that's provided to you simply because you're an advertiser. Google Analytics is one of them. Google not only tells you how your website is doing in terms of traffic, it's also giving you really good analyticals on any ads that you place with Google. That's true for YouTube as well. So if you're doing advertising on YouTube, you can really tell, it'll come back and tell you exactly what's going on with that particular one. And we'll go through those metrics in our next meeting. But basically, it'll say how many times people, what the reach was, how many people had the opportunity to see it, how many people saw it, how many people clicked on it. And if you set this up right with your webmaster, you can follow that from Google Analytics all the way through to your website, and Google will tell you whether or not you closed or not. Okay. Now, we've been doing this very successfully with Google and Meta, in Facebook, in other words, through the dairy, and have finally, after a lot of work, figured out exactly the kinds of things that for that particular business, the kinds of things that are working and how many people sign up from that. And we can track that all the way through from, as I mentioned from the beginning, what was the reach, and then all the way through the click through, et cetera, to determine what the cost of the sale was. So a true cost of goods sold all the way through. And then, of course, you add your margin in there. And now you've got, and we'll go through some examples later in another episode, but basically now you can tell whether or not you're making any money from that series of ads. Phenomenal stuff. It's not as hard as it sounds. Also, other media companies are providing this to you. Today, most newspapers and magazines are doing combinations of digital advertising with their own print media, and they will give you some feedback on whether or not people have seen the ad. Are they acting on the ad? That's much harder to do, as Ed certainly knows. Well, and John's been in the smaller newspaper business too. He understands this too, and it's difficult to know if somebody acted on a newspaper ad unless it's a coupon. That's why coupons are so useful, because you get the discount because you clip the coupon and you came in and you bought it. And so that's a really convenient way to measure. But you have to make sure to enter that into your books. Now, keep in mind, in order to get the business, you had to do and give an incentive. The incentive was usually the discount. Now the discount lowered your margin on your goods. So that's you're now just like a retailer acting just the same. You may think you're not a retailer, but if you're a plumber and you're given a discount on the first visit, you were acting like a retailer because you just took a markdown to get the business. And that's another whole story. Mountain Media is one that is just entered the market. I mean, they've been around for 5 or 6 years. They're still kind of trying to find their way. I think they're going to blow up and be another Google unless Google steals this business from them. Basically, this is TV streaming. Anything you stream on television, they can access, and they'll give you the same. So this is for regular video type advertising. It's not still advertising. So it's a replacement or it's an enhancement to YouTube, except you're sitting down in a lean back kind of way, very casual because you're in your chair watching. Of course, you could be using a pad too, or a laptop. But basically, that's going to measure it and give you the same statistics that all these other companies do. And you bid on it in the same way that Google bids on those ads. Others, some people who sell on advertising actually advertise on Amazon. They sell on Amazon, advertise on Amazon. Then you've got streaming TV, which is another way of talking about what Mountain Media does. That has been, I've noticed, usually in combination with media companies that sell a little bit of everything. And then you've got Shopify. Shopify has an analytics if you happen to have an online store, and of course LinkedIn ads. And then you've got this whole genre of CRM, and that is a customer relationship management program such as HubSpot, Salesforce, Zoho. And then Constant Contact is not quite a CRM, but that's started off as a direct mail email program, and they'll give you these things too. So you can see that this is not so as bad as it sounds. You can end up with a whole screen of analyticals that will really help you understand where you are in terms of the advertising gathering, the data gathering, and the analytics. So you'll really be able to determine what's going on with that. So that's the introduction, gentlemen, of the topic. We have a lot more specific things to go through, and we'll do that. We'll do that on our next meeting. But I thought then that I would just kind of get from you some observations. A lot of this is not new to either one of you. What did I miss? What did I get wrong? Or other comments?
I'll start off with one that part of the issue is I've seen individuals who I've been worked with and companies I've been worked with go through the process of setting up a method of analyzing and getting the data, and then when they get it, they don't do anything actually with it.
Right.
Um,
That's right.
they kind of compare themselves as a benchmark. They look at what if scenarios, but they actually don't take action from the work. And in fact, sometimes there's a resistance to actually trust what the analytics are telling them, because they're stuck with the way of doing business that they have been involved with for 5 years, 10 years, whatever it happens to be.
Hmm.
And so it's a matter of being aware of and able to change. And I'm one of those people. I've got to admit that, you set up a line of business and you resist having to reinvent it. And so part of the skill comes down, I think, in the consultancy world is to say, okay, how do we perhaps not turn the card upside down, but how do we try a beta program over here, or how do we do this? Let's explore what the benefits and detriments are, because there's always unintended consequences that are good and bad. So I'd say that the commitment to enter in and try to apply those analytics into a meaningful way that would affect your business. That's a really hard thing to do.
Change is hard, and most people don't like it. And trying to lead people to change is even more difficult.
So typically, part of that discussion comes down to um, is this a trend? Is it a spot, a shift in the market, or is this something that is going to be a long-term um, outcome that we need to work with? Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
and
good point.
so yeah, and so I think that's when a group of people who are in the same industry or allied industries, in some sense, the Japanese system or kritsu has really worked out well for them in the sense that you have multiple businesses that they're not directly competitors, but they could be supporting and interdependent on each other, and their shared combination of intelligence will look at these analytics in a way that will really help establish a new direction. Ed, you kind of sit on the top of it because, you look at I mean, the financial results are an absolute result of the analytical process. And now, you can be somewhat objective because it's not your baby. You're analyzing it. You're not really owning up to it. As business owners like myself, we kind of own that particular process. We thought this was a good thing. We're in it. It is a good thing. Are you telling me it's not a good thing anymore? Um, so it gets a little personal there.
It does get personal, and Ron's marketing wheel, the analyzation is at towards the end of the process. I would build a case that it should be the beginning of the process because you really have to understand your business, your components of your business, your profitability by customer, by product, so that you can determine what you want to achieve in any type of an advertising program that you come up with. Because if you're losing money on a certain component with a certain customer, you don't want more customers and products like that. You don't want more business so that you lose
Make it
more.
up on volume, Ed.
Right, right.
Yeah, so
Well, you're right, and I don't disagree with that at all. Except there are an awful lot of businesses that they don't know where to start and they don't know how to analyze it. And so it's like the question is, well, okay, where do you? So, and the truth of the matter is that because it's a continuous circle, it's a continuous improvement process. And so the analytics always do help the adjusting because you go back in to look at the customers again, deeper this time than you did before. The same thing with your competitive analysis and adjusting your competencies. And the whole thing starts again. That's
And it
why.
can start off pretty easy. I mean, in the beginning, it can be a napkin on you can be at a Denny's or a fast food restaurant, and you do the basics on a net. You don't have to get into, you know, minute detail, but you can kind of put the big pieces out and go, wow, I think this is something here. And then you can say, well, to what extent can we really do this?
Yes, exactly. And that's the way it tends to be utilized. And over the years, this is not something that has to happen on a very quick basis. I mean, I used to tell customers they would look at that and they go, "Oh my gosh, I don't even know where to go or what to do with this." And I said, "No problem, and that's why I'm here."
That's why you do it.
Is
Yeah.
to help you go through this. And you do have to do a quick start sometimes. And sometimes you can't analyze anything. It's just like, well, we haven't, and I've had this happen. We've got this big company, we're doing millions of dollars in business. We never had to market. Yeah, okay. I hear that all the time. In other words, you're so smart you don't need me. Okay, fine. I mean, on the other hand, well, why did you call me? Why are we talking? You want to help me out with that? Why are we talking about this? Oh, well, we've decided we do need to grow a little bit faster, or we've got a competitor that's growing twice as fast as we are. Oh, okay. So maybe you do need some help. So when they are baffled by all of those steps, I've gone through those like we would do a quick on napkin analysis on customers in one session. And we literally do the first three things in the first three sessions by simply talking to, their key team members. Because you can find out an awful lot of accurate information by hearing from them. Well, what do you think about your customers, et cetera, et cetera? And occasionally we would start with with the value diamond and say, okay, let's just rate yourself on all these issues, and bam, I've got a good sense for where they are. Then we begin to go around. They feel like, oh, we're starting to actually do some marketing now because we're talking about positioning, talking about who we are, or who we think that we are. And then finally, in 4 or 5 weeks, you can be advertising with a reasonably thorough, initial look at this stuff. But then I found that going around the circle, say the second or third time, might be a year later, might be 3 years later. It might take 3 years to go around when you're looking at long-term trends and then do it all again. And in the case of my one long oldest clients, we've effectively gone around this 6 or 7 times in 22 years. Okay, so it's a long-term kind of thing as well. It's not just a short-term thing. And frankly, you can do some pretty short-term, right now decisions based on all of the digital stuff that we talked about. I mean, if you know how to use the analytics and how to make adjustments, so it's something that is easier to get them to do a little bit at a time. If you run two kinds of ads on Google and you get one of them outperforming by triple compared to the other one, that's not a hard decision. It's like you don't have to really change anything. You just simply have to realize that the creative that you used or whatever you did different in one ad was better than the other one. And let's stop with that and let's come up with something that is going to be closer to the one that was successful. And some of it's trial and error. You don't want to be too crazy, like Budweiser, but you want to do something a little bit different from time to time in order to change it up to see if there's something you're missing. Change some of the copy, try and figure out if different words mean different things to different audiences, those kinds of things. But I think in terms of change, I mean, your comments were both well taken. And the one thing that well, I think, Ed, you touched on this a little bit, and that is that sometimes they're vested emotionally in what they're doing. And so when someone, you're talking to a buyer, this used to happen when I was doing just retail consulting, talking to a buyer about, some of the mistakes they've made and some of the wins that they have had. Um, Strangely, then you find that buyer defending that particular product. And you're going, look, you've only sold a third of it. It's been on the floor twice as long as it should be. The bananas are already brown. When are you going to admit that number one, you bought the wrong thing, or number two, you bought too much? Come on. How hard is this to understand? And there's a lot of defensiveness at first when people when people find that they're actually being measured on their actual performance, on what really matters. Because it used to be in some of these cases that it'd be like, oh, well, you can't pick them all. They'd come up with a million statements, about how certain buyers can't know it all and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the year, it all comes out in the wash and everything's okay. Why? Because we made a 2% profit again this year. It's like, okay. But you left 5% on the table because you haven't looked at the details. And that's really true in a lot of cases. So if they really want to improve their business, they have to have good retained earnings, right? And if they're going to have retained earnings, which comes from profit, they're going to have to learn how to increase their profitable sales.
That is correct.
So,
It's a good summary.
Excuse me. What did you say?
That's a great summary to the whole program.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Well, if it was a great summary, then I guess we'll just wrap it up there, huh? Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it very much. We'll see everybody next week.